I find the options that the church gives to someone who's gay in LDS very, very frustrating. Because the church it seems like the church feels like they're giving people like me options. And from my side of the table, those options are extremely unrealistic and extremely hopeless. The option of, all right, if you're gay, that's okay, we still love you. You can't act on that. You can't date. You can't pursue any sort of companionship. To me, is a horrible, horrible sentence to live throughout life. The irony is I don't really know anybody who is currently living that way of life. I don't think it's sustainable. I think it's a recipe for many types of personal disasters in one life. I certainly think it's a sentence to depression and loneliness and potential serious consequences that can come of that. Me personally, I think one of the great lifelines that any person has in life is hope. And by telling someone that they cannot pursue companionship, that they will never have companionship, that they will grow old alone, that they will be on their deathbed alone, and that if they ever have any problems, they will be alone, I think that is a very bleak scenario, and I think that's where people really, if they're caught in that situation, life isn't very enjoyable and life is very devoid of fulfillment. I can speak personally to myself as one who's not in a relationship, and there are some definite challenges with that. And I'm reminded on a daily basis when I come home from work to an empty house that I don't want to have an empty house the rest of my life, and I hope that that's not something that is in store for me. I want that companionship. I want someone there that can be with me through the good times and through the rough times, and we can enjoy that challenge and that reward together, and I hope that I can offer that same thing to a significant other. I have a dear friend of mine who I don't think I know anybody who has stuck with the church longer than this person. He, until the age of 36, was fully active in the church. He was in very, very high-impact church callings, and he held a temple recommend, and he went to the temple on a weekly basis. This in the face of admitting to himself that he was gay. And I think for a while there, he was holding out and living that church-prescribed path of being celibate and finding fulfillment through going to the temple. He had a experience with his bishop where he actually did nothing to break any of the parameters of holding a temple recommend. He'd broken no commandments. He'd broken no covenants. He'd simply become a little more open about being gay, and his bishop took his temple recommend away from him. And I saw his world literally come down on top of him as a result of that. And that was when I realized that this approach of holding out and saying the church is going to love me and stick with me through thick and thin really made me question how sustainable is that life of living alone and having no hope for companionship. And he's really the last person that I've known who has stuck with that. And to this day, I really know no one who has successfully and happily lived life with no hope for companionship. The other path of pursuing a relationship in excommunication, I think there are a lot of people who are gay in LDS who would have added tremendous value to the LDS Church. And they've been excommunicated because they found someone that they loved, and they realized that this person loved them too, and they loved them a little more than their church may love them. And so they picked between those two choices, and that's a very, very difficult and very, very unfair choice to have to make, to choose between a loved one and the church. And I've asked people many times over the years who have come to me and said, why don't you just, be openly gay? That's fine. We have no problem with you being gay, but why don't you just stay active in the church and not pursue any sort of relationship? And the question I always ask that person is, especially if someone's married, take your spouse and ask yourself the question, if you are given the ultimatum of your spouse or the church, who would you choose? And I think that's the exact same dilemma that anyone who's gay faces. And I think most people, heterosexual or homosexual, would probably choose that person that they love. I think that there are varying degrees and levels of one's orientation. I think that some people have more attraction to the same sex and less attraction to the opposite sex, and vice versa. Me, myself, I have no attraction to the opposite sex, and I have complete full attraction to the same sex. So for me, to honestly and fairly think that I could add any value or be a good partner to a woman with that disposition of mine, I think is a complete disaster waiting to happen. And I'm very grateful that I never put myself in that path, because I think if I did, today I'd be a very miserable person, wondering what I'd done to myself. There are many elements of the relationship that are not just sexual. And for me, if the attraction to the same sex were just sexual, I would be more open to, why not marry my best female friend and pursue a family, and we could just have sexual relations when it was time to procreate. But attraction and connection between two people is far more than sexual. And whether people are having sexual relations or not, orientation is so much deeper than that. I know that if I were with a woman and we took that path of, let's say, for example, we didn't have intimate relations, I would be a very poor partner to her spiritually. I would be a very poor partner to her on an emotional level. I just wouldn't have the interest to give, and I wouldn't be able to provide that kind of partnership to a woman, much like a straight person would not be able to provide that kind of partnership to a member of their own sex, irrespective of sexual relations.